welcome to the 5th episode of the Green Bean podcast. I'm Katie, this is Jack, and Jack really doesn't want to be here, so I'm going to let him go and carry on with my introduction without him. This is going to be a bit of an unusual episode today. I have been doing quite a lot of travelling since I recorded last, and I'd really like to tell you a bit about both of the trips that I've been on, the first of which was a trip to Poland for the release of my book Lighter Than My Shadow, which has just been translated into Polish. And the second was a trip to the Yorkshire Dales with my family, which is a place that we always used to go on holiday when I was a kid and has such a special place in my heart. So all of the outdoor shots that you'll see in this episode come from Yorkshire rather than Devon. And I hope you enjoy them. There's no Jack because Jack didn't come with me on this trip, but he seems to have forgiven me for going away without him, and I'm really enjoying being back home with him. I've also got a couple of new knitting projects to share with you and some talk about sewing, but I'll start by talking a bit more about my book, Lighter Than My Shadow. It's hard to believe that it was 5 years ago that my graphic memoir, Lighter Than My Shadow, was published in the UK. It was such a mammoth part of my life to produce this book. It's massive. It's 500 pages long. It's fully illustrated and hand-lettered, all by me. It took me, honestly, the best part of 5 years to make it, and it's a memoir of my struggle and recovery from eating disorders and sexual abuse. So not only was it arduous in terms of physically drawing that much, it was also arduous in terms of the content I was writing about. But it was really a major undertaking, and such a huge part of my life for such a long time. Last year it was published in the United States, and I was lucky enough to travel to New York almost exactly a year ago, actually, to sign and give away some advance reader copies at the New York Book Expo. And this year it was published in its first foreign language, which was Polish. And I can't tell you how exciting it is to see my work in a book that I completely can't understand. It's slightly bizarre, but it's really incredible to think about it reaching an entirely different audience of people who I wouldn't otherwise be able to communicate with. And that's just a really incredible thing to think that this story that I felt was so important to tell and to share is now making its way to more people who I wouldn't be able to communicate with any other way. So yes, my lovely Polish publisher, Timoff Comics, invited me to go to Warsaw for the Warsaw Comics Festival, and I just had a fantastic time. It's always a privilege to be invited to travel to another country, and it's a really humbling experience, I think, to find yourself immersed in another culture and where people speak a different language. It really wakes you up to realise how small your world and your community is, even if you speak English, which is one of the biggest languages in the world. To find yourself in a place where you can't understand what people are saying, and you know, I was amazed how good people's English was. It is slightly embarrassing how terrible we are with foreign languages in this country, to just go somewhere and assume that people will be able to communicate with me in my own language when I really can't speak very much of theirs. But it was incredible. I was made to feel so welcome, and I loved being at this comics festival, seeing loads of different comics, ones that I recognised which had been translated from English, and ones that I didn't recognise which were only available in Polish, which was wonderful but also slightly frustrating because, you know, I love comics and I love books, and I just wanted to pick them up and read them, and it was kind of alienating being at this huge book festival and not being able to read any of the books, but also wonderful. You know, one of the things that I loved the most was that the comics festival was part of the book festival. I think we have a strange thing in this country where comics and graphic novels are seen as separate from prose books, and I really loved seeing how in Warsaw the comics festival was integrated with the so-called real book festival, rather than being two separate events that would take place in two separate buildings, two separate cities, two different times of the year. They were one and the same thing, and that was really encouraging. I didn't take any video in Poland because of a slightly boring reason. I could not arrange travel insurance for my camera, so I did a few stories and posts on Instagram while I was away, but it just wasn't practical, unfortunately, to film any part of my trip. But I'll put a highlight in my Instagram stories of all of my things that I saw and got up to while I was in Poland. And if you speak Polish, or know anybody who does speak Polish, you can now find copies of my book in Polish, as well as in English. And for those of you who don't know, obviously the book is available in America and in the UK as well. And if you wanted to buy it directly from me, you can do it through my Etsy shop. I charge the full cover price. You can obviously get it cheaper from other places that you might buy books. But what I do as a thank you from anyone who decides to buy it from me directly is I will always sign and sketch inside it. And if you have a particular request of somebody you want to dedicate it to, or what you want that sketch to be of, I'm always really happy to take those requests. So yeah, that's where you can get hold of my book if you would like to. After my trip to Poland, I had a few days back at work, and then I went away on a trip to Yorkshire. I've mentioned already, Yorkshire is one of my favourite places in the world, and I think that's because when I was growing up, my family used to have a caravan there, and we went at least twice a year every year while I was growing up. So it's a place that's full of childhood memories and family memories, as well as being just one of the most beautiful landscapes I've ever been in. So I always look forward to a trip to Yorkshire. And this one was particularly special in many ways. So I went, in the beginning I spent a weekend in Swaledale with one of my best friends, Mary. And then I travelled down south a little way to Malmdale to spend the rest of the week with my family. And I'm quite close to my extended family. There's quite a lot of us, and it was really lovely, particularly this time, to spend a week with my little nephew who's just about to turn 1 year old. So it was really nice to spend a bit of extra time with him. and with all of my family as well. We did a lot of walking, looking at the amazing wildflowers and the wildlife that's around at this time of year. And yeah, I think one of the things I want to share with you on the podcast is a very special trip that we made to visit a rare breeds farm called Gam Farm. I first found out about this farm on Instagram from a lady who goes by the name of Hello Miss Goggins. It's not actually open to the public officially. They're working towards being open to the public, but you can... I emailed them and asked if it would be possible to visit, and they very kindly accommodated me and all of my crazy family one morning to come and visit and have a look at the lovely work that they're doing to look after rare breed sheep and cows and goats, and yes, obviously to buy some wool as well. It was inevitable that some wool was going to be purchased. So I've got some lovely video footage of their Shetland sheep and their white-faced woodland sheep, and I think it really shows how different two sheep breeds can be. To see these different sheep in the same field, the Shetland sheep are noticeably smaller and obviously come in lots of different colours, and the white-faced woodland sheep are much bigger, and they have horns, both the males and the females, and you can see the difference in size even between the lambs. Helen, the lady from the farm, was kind enough to feed all of the sheep for us so I could get this lovely video footage, so I hope you enjoy seeing some of the sheep, and I will share the yarn that I bought with you in due course when I start knitting with it. So I've got two new knitting projects to share with you today, and that's because I've finished two projects since I recorded the last episode, so I felt entitled to cast on two new things. The first project that I finished was my Sometime Alone shawl, which is a design by Sylvia McFadden. It's a big triangular lace shawl, and I'm really pleased with how it came out, but I haven't been wearing it very much because it's summer here in the UK where I live, and shawls are, especially big DK weight shawls, are not really the most appropriate thing to wear. So I haven't worn it very much yet, but I know it's going to get a lot of wear in the winter. And the second piece that I finished was my chocolate stout jumper, which is the Humulus jumper by Isabel Kramer. And despite that also being a DK weight project and a woolen spun long sleeve jumper, I've hardly taken it off, and I've even worn it on some days when it's been completely inappropriate to wear a thick woolen jumper, just because I'm so pleased with it. Yeah, I can't say enough good things about that pattern and that design. I was really pleased with how the Garthenor yarns that I used for it worked together, and I know it's going to be something that I get loads and loads of wear out of. I'm really glad that I did it in kind of brown neutral colours because it will go with everything. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with that project as well. So yeah, it felt like time to cast on a couple of new things, and it was also a special occasion because I was going on holiday to Yorkshire, which is my favourite place in the world. And I had a couple of projects in my mind that I wanted to cast on that have a bit of a Yorkshire theme. So it seemed like a good time to get both of those projects on the go. The first of which is this jumper, which is on my needles now. You can see the back at the moment, this is the front. So it's a cable jumper which I'm designing myself. It's just going to be a simple fitted jumper with set-in sleeves, coming down to just to sit on the hips with a deep ribbing at the bottom. So it's going to have this cable up the front and plain sleeves and back, all in reverse stocking stitch, so the cable pops out at the front. And I took the cable from a book called The Cable Knitting Handbook by Annie Maloney, which is, I believe, a self-published book. It just comes in this spiral bound format, and I think you can buy it as a PDF as well. It's got about 100 different unusual cable designs in it. You know, sometimes you see the same cables over and over again, and I really liked this one because it has garter stitch in the middle of those cables rather than just reverse stocking stitch. So the cables themselves are quite simple, but I really liked the added texture of the garter stitch in the middle. The yarn I'm using is from this cone. It's 100% Swaledale wool, which I bought in Yorkshire on my holiday last year. Now, Swaledales are the sheep breed that you see most often in the Yorkshire Dales, so you'll understand why I wanted to have a project in Swaledale wool to knit on while I was in Yorkshire. There's lots of things I can say about this yarn. The first thing is that it is oily. So it's come straight from the factory on this cone, and it still has the spinning oil in it. So that means it smells kind of funny. It also feels quite greasy in my hands, and it's quite sticky to knit with. And the other thing about it is that it's leaner than it actually will be when it's finished, if that makes sense. So I got my swatch here. And I'm not sure it'll show on the camera, but there's a real difference in the fabric between the unblocked knitting, which is quite stiff. The fabric's quite open, you can see through the gaps between the stitches. But when I blocked my swatch, the yarn really fluffed up, and kind of the fibres filled in all of those gaps. It doesn't have that funny oily smell anymore, and it's surprisingly soft. So Swaledales are quite a hardy breed of sheep. They're adapted to living out on the Yorkshire Dales through all the seasons, so their coats are not kind of soft. So I was a little bit concerned how wearable this yarn might be for me, but I'm very pleasantly surprised. Yeah, I'm really pleased with the swatch, and so based on the swatch I've designed the jumper which I'm working on. So I got the yarn from a shop called Swaledale Woolens, which is in a village called Muka, and I didn't even know that it was there. We just happened to be driving through the village last year, and I saw a wool shop, and obviously we had to pull over and stop and buy wool. That's how it goes. But I was really, really pleased to find some wool that was pure Swaledale. It's you know, quite often you go to places and you see sheep all around in the fields, but then you go to wool shops and there's wool from other countries, or there's wool from it doesn't say where, and it certainly doesn't say what breed it is. So it was really exciting to find some wool that was the local breed that I could buy and knit with. The second project that I've cast on is a stranded Colorwork hat. I fell in love with this design when I saw it on the Promote Shetland Instagram feed, and it's a design by a lady called Linda Shearer, who is a member of the Shetland Guild of Spinners, Knitters, Weavers and Dyers, and she designed this hat to raise awareness of the difficulties that are facing curlews, which is a incredibly beautiful wading bird which lives on Shetland, and they also they breed in Yorkshire. So the sight and the sound of the curlews is really evocative of Yorkshire to me, and they have this incredibly elegant, long, curved beak. They're really distinctive, beautiful birds that remind me of Yorkshire. So I knew as soon as I saw this hat design that I would need to cast it on and make it. I am making it entirely out of stash yarn, which is really exciting. I don't often find that I have everything in my stash that I need for a project. There's always seems to be some excuse to buy something extra, but in this case I had everything I needed. I'm using a mixture of yarns from Jameson's of Shetland in the Shetland Spindrift and JC Rennie, which is this colour that I used for the cuff. I want to say cuff. I don't know if hats have brim. I don't know, whatever it is. The ribbing at the bottom of the hat is in one of my favourite yarns ever, actually. It's a JC Rennie colour called Wheat Ear, which is another bird that you see up in Yorkshire quite a lot. And it looks beige at a distance, but when you look at it closely, it's got bits of orange and yellow and blue and all kinds of different colours in it. So it's one of those really, really beautiful yarns. And the curlew pattern I'm knitting in various different shades of brown, so it's going to be quite neutral, but I think a really wearable hat when I finished. I substituted 2x2 rib for 1x1 rib, which is given in the pattern, just because my 1x1 rib looks really ugly, and whatever I do I can't seem to make it look neat. So I knitted 2x2 instead, and that came out much more neat. And you might notice that I'm knitting the hat inside out. So you've got the wrong side of the colourwork facing you at the moment, and that's a little trick that my dear friend Ella Austin taught me. Ella Austin is an amazing knitwear designer. She designs a lot of stranded colourwork, and particularly stranded colourwork toys, which are very small, obviously small circumference items knitted in the round. And she was finding a lot of people were having difficulty with their tension, that their colourwork was getting very tight. And she gives this suggestion that you knit it inside out. And what it means is that you carry your floats around a longer area. If you think, if you're knitting with the right side facing you, the area that you're carrying your float across is shorter than the area in front of your knitting. Whereas if you turn it inside out, it kind of stretches those floats out a little bit, and it means you never have that thing where your colourwork is tighter than your ordinary knitting. And it works really well for me when I'm knitting small things in colourwork in the round to keep the tension even. So it's what I do all the time. The only sad thing is that what you're looking at is not the fun part of the design, but I still have the front of the work facing me. I just have the bulk of the work at the front rather than at the back, which is where you'd have it if I was knitting it right side out. So it's not like, you know, when people say, oh, you're knitting it inside out, I'm not knitting it backwards. I'm just knitting it flipped inside out so that I can stretch those floats out and keep my tension a bit more even. have a current sewing project to share with you in this episode, but I thought I'd spend a minute talking about my grey tweed skirt, which I have finally finished. I know a lot of you were interested to find out what I decided in the end, and I decided to keep it at a longer length for a couple of reasons. First of all, I put it on and it looked lovely. And second of all, I'm trying to challenge myself a little bit to wear slightly different shapes, and particularly to get away from wearing tights all the time, which is very much my comfort zone and obviously necessary in the winter. But as the weather's a bit warmer, I want to be a bit braver and try wearing some skirts without tights, and the longer length felt easier for me to do that. And I'm really pleased with how the skirt came out. It's the fit is slightly not what I was hoping for. It sits more on my hips rather than on my waist, which is fine. I'm probably going to wear things tucked into it. So it works, and it certainly is not too big, but I would have liked it to just sit slightly higher on me. And apart from that, I have a small confession to make about it, which meant that it sat in the naughty corner for another week, even after I'd finished it. And that is that I was slightly careless with pressing it after I'd finished, and I know better than this. I know all about using a pressing cloth to take care of my delicate fabrics, but I was in a rush. I wanted to try on my finished skirt, and I used a hot steam iron without a pressing cloth, and I scorched the fabric. It sounds terrible, and you know, in that moment of doing it, it was terrible. I was really upset with myself, and far too angry with myself to wear the skirt for about a week after I did that. But when I pulled it out again, I discovered that it wasn't actually that bad. It's barely noticeable if you didn't know it was there, and I've certainly learned my lesson to take care of my woolen fabrics a bit more gently. I do have my next sewing project in mind. It's going to be the Burnside bibs, which is a pattern from Sew House 7, which I discovered on Pinterest and fell in love with straight away. It is a pair of kind of loose, flowy summer dungarees that have ties that cross at the back and tie a bow around the waist. It's just perfect. It's got that balance of being trousers, so it's a challenge for me in terms of my sewing and the shapes that I'm wearing, but it's kind of loose and flowy and summery, and the version I'm making doesn't have a zip to fit, and you know how I feel about not fitting zips. So I'm really excited to give this pattern a go, and I thought I'd show you the fabric that I've picked. So on my way back from Poland, I stopped in at my mum and dad's house in London for a couple of days, and whenever I'm in London, I have to visit my favourite fabric shop, which is the Cloth House on Berwick Street in Soho. They have really such beautiful fabrics and always something different every time you go. This time I picked out this beautiful cotton check, and it's got a kind of seersucker sort of texture to it. Even no matter how much I press it, it doesn't quite want to sit flat, and I really like that about it. And it has the kind of, it's really soft, it feels like pyjamas, so I think it's going to be perfect for that pattern, and that's going to be the next sewing project that I work on. Hopefully I'm going to cut it out this weekend. finally, I wanted to say a few words about the music that you've been hearing in this episode. It's some new music which I have been very kindly given permission to use by the incredible composer and guitarist Will McNichol. When I was listening to his record a few weeks ago, I thought how perfectly it would fit for the podcast, and I was really honoured when he said yes, that I could use some of his music. So all of the tracks that are featured in this episode are from his album The Wake Up, and if you've enjoyed them, I really urge you to check his music out. He's an incredibly talented guy, and thank you, Will, for letting me use your music on this episode. That's about all for today. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about what I've been up to. I'm sorry that Jack has not graced us with much of his presence, but I'm sure he'll be back next time. I hope you're enjoying whatever creative projects that you're working on, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.